What is the secret to unlocking your full potential? What makes your idols any different than you? How do you become the person you've always wanted to be in life? This is where you get all of your questions answered. My name is Justin Shank, and I sit down with some of the most epic individuals who are changing the world with their actions in business and in life. We discuss how they did it, why they pushed themselves, and more importantly, how they were able to focus on continuous growth to achieve their dreams. Welcome to the Growth Now movement. This week, I sit down with Devin Galaudet. Devin Galaudet is the editor and publisher of the In the Know Traveler and In the Know Bride, which chronicles his endeavor to marry his wife in 100 countries around the world, 20 times in 15 countries so far. Devin has written for the Huffington Post, The Good Men Project, and many others. A frequently sought-after guest expert on relationship and travel, Devin has appeared on Fox, NBC, and so many other places, and he actually just released a memoir called 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes that is currently available on Amazon. Now the official part's out of the way. I had the pleasure of meeting Devin at the New Media Summit when I was chosen as an icon of influence in the new media space, and Devin was there and he told me his story and I was blown away. I thought it was hilarious, heartfelt, and his journey has been absolutely incredible. I think you guys will love this guy's personality, and I think you would love this episode. I can't wait for you guys to dive in. But before we get there, have you gotten your tickets to Growth Now Movement Live yet? Tickets are absolutely flying off the shelf. There's only 5 VIP tickets available. So make sure if you want to have dinner with the speakers, if you want to come to the mastermind the day after, there's only 5 spots left. So you want to grab those tickets. Obviously, we still have VIP and regular access available as well. Go to gnmlive.com, and I cannot wait to connect with you guys in person there. Now, without further ado, I give to you Devin Galaudet. Devin, welcome to the Growth Now movement, man.
I am excited to be here. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm glad that we connected at New Media Summit. We didn't get too much time one-on-one, but at the New Media Summit, where I was an icon of influence, people do these pitches. And I just remember specifically you having your pitch, and you did your 2-minute pitch or however long it was. I think yours was pretty short. And I went, this guy needs to be on my show. It was an immediate, how you delivered it, the story you were telling, just the genius behind it. But then I also went, I can tell there's something deeper there. And that's why I'm excited to have this conversation with you and share it with my audience, because I think that, there's value in the journey that you took, right? So let's start with this. What is the title of your book? And then we'll unpack how we got there.
Okay. First off, my book is called 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes. And it's actually officially released today, September 18th.
So exciting. So exciting. And I know it's going to do well because of the genuineness behind it and the comedy and everything else that goes with it. And just the title alone, I was like, what is this all about? And if you just read the description on your website, it's mind-blowing, the journey that you've been through in your life in some way, shape, or form. So let's talk about that day you got the phone call and your dad's final wishes.
Well, I think I have to back up just a teeny bit.
For sure.
My father was I think a loving man. And I think if he was given more opportunities, he would have really, I think he had some magic, but he came from poverty and he did what he did to get by. And he really was very much a con man. And so when I got a call, it was from his 7th wife.
Literally his 7th.
Literally according to him and my mother. So,
wow.
It was a tricky thing. So it was his 7th wife, and I didn't even know he was married, and I had never really heard of her. I mean, I think maybe I knew of her at some point, but we had kind of had some distance, and she had said that, your father's died, and his last request was to be scattered off the coast of Cadiz, Spain, while Ave Maria was sung, which is, I suppose, fine. But he wasn't Spanish, and he probably had never. I mean, he wouldn't get on a boat or a plane if his life depended on it. So I don't even think he's ever been to Spain, so I don't even know where it came from. But I did in fact end up with his ashes and lugged him around and took him to Spain.
Wow, that's crazy. So, and it's funny. So while playing Ave Maria, like it's funny that you said he was a con man. Like, where did this thought even come from, do you think, from him?
I don't know. I mean, what I do know is that I think if he wasn't able to provide it in sort of like a normal way, he was going to find some back alley. He was going to find some weird justification or a rationalization to do the thing he really wanted you to do, if that makes sense. And if I were to guess, he either had told her some story about Spain,
made up story, of course.
Yeah, made up. No, totally. Like there was nothing. Maybe he read a magazine article and said, wow, I wish I had been to Spain. And just thought, well, maybe you'll go to Spain. Or maybe, I don't know what the rationale was, because it was the first I had heard of it. So she had told me that A, that he had died, and B, that he wanted to go to Spain, in the same little conversation. To be quite honest with you, like, we were not close for probably the last 15 years, maybe even longer of his life. Mm-hmm. And so even still, like, I kind of knew who he was, but he was still, he was my greatest hero. And so getting the news, it was almost like I didn't have much of a chance, but tears were like exploding off of my face.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that. He's somebody who you didn't talk to for 15 years, but you just called him your hero. Yeah. How does that line up? And I think that's interesting, because I now have a closer relationship with my father, but there were 7.5 years of my life, my adult life, that I didn't talk to him. So and that's kind of like that push and pull father son type of mentality, right? So like, how can there be somebody who for 15 years of your life wasn't there at the end, but he's your hero?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the deal that we set up with fathers and sons, or any really close parental relationship. In other words, my father made a whole slew of incredibly obvious mistakes, and he was the guy. He was the guy in the room, and he was the guy that if I was going to get like a kiss on the boo-boo, so to speak, I skinned my knee, he would be the guy to do it. My mother was not a real warm, huggy kind of person. I mean, we could have a whole separate show on her. But Dad was like, he was a very loving, charismatic, funny, warm guy, but he wasn't necessarily a reliable guy or a steady guy. I mean, he had a lot of talent, but he had a whole bunch of different careers during the course of my life.
Yeah. So like you said, I mean, he was almost like a con man, and I'm going to play therapist for a second. And it seems like he was trying to justify some sort of something missing in his life by being that joyful guy. The person who's always joyful is there's a saying, something along the lines like, the most joyful person in the world is usually or in the room is usually the saddest, or whatever the case may be. So I'd be interested, I wish I could hear more about that. You know what I mean? So with that being said, how much was he in your life as a child?
He was a constant.
Yeah.
He was a constant. I mean, my mother and I will disagree on how often he was gone. I would say more often than what she's letting on or what she remembers. And the truth of the matter is, one of the joys of memories is that you end up, glomming onto things that are relevant to you. You know what I mean? The things, if my father disappeared for a couple of days, it may not have meant much to my mother. Mm-hmm. For me, it was a major. Sure. Those were kind of major things. But so for the most part, he was around until he divorced my mother, and they were together a long time. They were together for, I think, about 21 years, something to that effect. Okay. But there was this extensive history before then where Dad was absolutely a Rolling Stone. And then, of course, he was married after Mom. so he was around, and then when he became 20, or when I became 20, he just sort of disappeared. I mean, we were still kind of close, but he never gave me his address or a phone number. It was always he needed to call me, and for a long time that was fine until all of a sudden, he sort of disappeared.
Yeah. What's that do for, like, what has that done for you? Like, what type of personality traits and what type of awarenesses do you have that you wouldn't have had otherwise with it if you didn't have a father that was kind of in and out of the picture, and so much in your life and then not in your life, and then so much in your life and not in your life?
Well, I think I think when I was probably in my early 20s, I was probably dealing more with how to be a man. And really, he was the example of what I understood. And what I understood from him was drinking and chain smoking and being a little bit curt, and then being loving when it was, when I think it served him, or when it was easy. But I think there's a part of me that's like, I have no idea, because I don't know exactly why he and I sort of parted. I mean, I can kind of guess, and I believe that I do a little bit in the book, which has more to do with, there was a point when he was the Grand Mufti. That may not speak to you. If Dad was sitting here, it would speak to him, but it was kind of like he was a presence. He walked into the room. He had style. He had swagger. He was pretty badass. He was a wide guy. So I think he'd be happy to kick your ass if that's, if that was sort of a requirement. And I don't think I had any of those things. And so I was already probably wrestling with the notion of how can I be like him?
Sure.
And when he split, there was two things. Is that one, I think all of that style and swag and all that stuff that I grew up with, as he got older and chain smoking his face off, I think that became harder and harder to live up to in his own mind. And his shtick, for lack of a better word, started wearing off. You know what I mean? I think it's like when you're young and cool, things work well. And when all of a sudden you're an adult, those kinds of things that you relied upon in your youth didn't have the same luster. So financially, he went down. I know that he struggled with that later in his life. And so it was, me on the one hand understanding he was less hip, slick, and cool. And then it was like, well, what did I do?
Yeah.
Maybe it was this thing that I did, or I didn't live up to his expectation, or I was a dud, which was something I was certain I was, I was reaching that goal. Oh, dud's up here. Oh, nailed it. Dud.
Got that one.
Wow. But slam dunk,
For sure. So what made you write the book?
Dad was a storyteller, and I talk about this in the book. We owned a furniture store together when I was in my late teens and very early 20s, and we sold stories. We didn't necessarily sell, legitimate Queen Anne furniture, but I could say that, W.C. Fields or some other celebrity from 100 years ago owned that desk.
That's great.
It may have been unethical, but we sold some stories that I imagine there's somebody who's sitting in their living room, and somebody says, "Hey, what's the story on that painting?" "Oh, a blind guy painted that painting." That was
teaching you how to be a con man.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. So we told a lot of stories, and I don't think that the stories registered as being special to me for a really long time until I got a little bit older and started learning that not everybody had these sort of really wackadoodle lives,
Yeah.
And so I went back to school when I was in my late 30s because I always regretted not having any kind of sort of education to point to. And pretty much all of my friends were at least college educated. Most of them had advanced degrees. And I went back to school for writing, and I thought I would, I ended up writing about him. It was just the most logical thing. And later I had a professor who said, "You're onto something."
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, obviously first 12 minutes of this episode, we talked about your dad, but who's Devin? Like, what are you all about? Like, what's your passion?
That's a great question. I think because my father, and I certainly didn't understand it when I was young, was a beautiful blueprint of how to fail, especially when I didn't have his kind of swag. So I was kind of going in the wrong direction for a long, long time. And to some degree, I mean, now I'm like in my early 50s, and now I'm just like, I would say for the last 10 years, I am, I think, I believe that I can kind of go after anything I want.
Yeah.
That failure is part of the road, that I feel that I have a purpose, and a lot of the purpose has much to do with being of service to others. I know that's a big, ridiculous topic, but a lot of it is. In other words, when I'm really focusing on me and what it is that I should be getting, and how you're supposed to think of me, and really worried about how others perceive me, the more I get caught up in the kind of nonsense that doesn't serve my day.
Yeah, I love that. I love all of that. I mean, to live the life that makes you happy, essentially, is what you're talking about, right? Like, not worrying about the things that aren't serving your day. You and I had a conversation, and we don't have to go into details about how we handle an onslaught of requests and people that don't necessarily know what they're talking about, and how do we handle those types of things, right? And we both shared our own stories of kind of shutting those people down in some way, shape, or form. But it's really about, like, I don't have time to waste, right? Like, there's an end to this whole thing, and I want to live it. And part of you and your wife's story when you were at the New Media Summit was all this travel. And the art of making this relationship a beautiful thing with you and your wife. How much of that do you think in that life you're living is going back to your father and the way you were raised?
Oh, yeah, no, I think hugely so. I think he gave me ultimately a blueprint of the things that I didn't really want to do, even though I get it. Like, I get it. There's a certain sexiness to the the James Dean kind of chain smoking sort of image that makes a lot of sense to me. And I still I remember talking to a friend about a third friend that I hadn't seen in ages, and there was a comment like, oh yeah, he's out there guns a-blazing. And I know what guns a-blazing means. Like, it really means like vomiting in some terrible downtown bar and being a total train wreck.
Yeah.
But there's a certain sex appeal to that thing. And so I don't know if happiness is the right word. I think it's more about purpose. Because when I'm doing something that is purposeful, I fully expect things not to go my way, and fully expect that it doesn't bring me happiness all the time. But what I have is a measure of contentment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is, like, the travel is certainly a thing, like, in terms of my purpose. I think that, the United States is a wonderful country. I love it here.
There are many big cities.
There are many big cities.
Great for family vacations.
We talked about that before the on button got clicked. It is family destination, but I also think that you have to go to Japan and Thailand and South Africa and a whole slew of other countries, because then you start learning how, while we have it right in many ways, you can also learn how they do it, and they do it right too. And so it's very easy to just it goes back to, if I'm helping you in some way, I'm probably going to learn something about you. Mm-hmm. And then maybe I can help serve your purpose in some small way, if only to give you encouragement. I think the same is absolutely true in travel, is that I get to broaden my horizons and be part of some other system. And during that exchange, I get to learn about myself, what it is to walk down a street where I don't know the language and I don't know where I'm going, and feeling lost, alone, and afraid, and really understanding that I don't have to be in any moment at all. Like, lost doesn't even mean anything. That just means I don't know the name of the street address. Yeah. But something will come along.
Yeah, I love that. So let's go back to how, this life that you're living, because I'm fascinated right now. And it's funny because, like, we booked this interview out, like, it's been on the calendar for 3 months. Like, it's literally been just sitting there, right? So we're super booked out. But it's interesting because over the last couple weeks or so, I've become fascinated with the idea that who we are as adults, it was formed when we were children. And yes, there's a healthy view to that and an unhealthy view to that. I just did I do these moments of growth on my show every Friday. And I told a story about how, an elephant as a baby is tied up with a small string, and as it got bigger, it could easily break free. But because that string held it as a baby, it thinks it can still be held by the same string. And then we talk about like what's good and what's bad in that. And really the life that you've created as an adult, as I'm listening to your stories, is fully based off of what happened to you as a child. Even now, in the healthier version of it, like, obsessed with the James Dean thing. That's part of the travel. Like, it's badass to travel the world and see these cities and be a part of it. You saw your father's relationships in 7 marriages, and here you are, and you want to perfect the marriage thing, right? And you want to perfect the relationship thing. How did you flip that switch from being unhealthy, chain smoker-ish, to healthy version of that?
So this is a tricky quagmire kind of question. Because what I did is that there was a point with all the drinking and all the drugs and all the smoking and all the sort of questionable behavior, I knew that I wasn't being who it is that I should be. Because none of those things, there was a point where like all those things are fun and sexy and James Dean. And then there's the reality that for me to do those things, I had to go against what I believed was my own integrity. Mm. And when your integrity is out of line with yourself, there's nowhere to go except other than to feel shame. And so what I did at the time is I had a dream. And I do write about this a little bit. I had a dream, and I there's a place called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore. It is no more, but it was a very famous kind of woo-woo religion, Wicca, dancing cauldrons kind of place.
Wow.
And I dreamt that books would fly off the shelf. And my life was a train wreck. I was living in my mother's back room, and she really didn't like me very much. And she was a good judge of character, I assure you. And so I go into this bookstore, and I'm waiting for books to fly off the shelf at me, and they didn't. And I left, and then I walked down the block, and then I thought, well, I should get something, right? And so I go back in, and I buy a book on witch burning in Salem, and I buy a book on Kabbalah, which was dense and weird, and some other book on some other thing. And the long story short is I read the books, and I started going back every week and buying these used books because I had no money. And I eventually started getting into all kinds of magic things, magic with a K, more of a philosophical thing than anything else. And I ended up in a cult. And when I say cult,
what?
I'm saying it in a good way. I'm saying it like, there's a group called the Golden Dawn. They came out of Victorian England. They were mostly aristocrats in the late 1800s. And William Butler Yeats was a member for 30 years. And these are smart people. And basically what they were doing was they were trying to understand how we could best be our best selves. That was a bad way to phrase it, but that was kind of it. Like, how do I be my best Devin, for lack of a better description? So I ended up calling up like a weird arcane book, and out popped a little card, and I called the number like in a panic and said this like, hi, I don't know if I need to call you, but I feel that there's something in the air for me to call you. So here I'm calling you. If you feel I should call you, you should call me back, then call me back. And so she calls me back. I don't know if you need to call me, but you have called me. So let's say there's significance in that. And if you feel the need to call me back, then you can call me back. Childishness.
Yeah.
That all said, when I got involved in that thing, this sort of secret society kind of thing, while I was thinking I'm going to cast a spell and make it rain buckets of cash, it was really like, okay, now sit and meditate. Okay, who are you? What do you want? What's working in your life? What isn't working in your life? And you're going to learn about you, and we're going to do that together. And so when I say cult, there's a certain tongue in cheek, because I know that there are people who have suffered through different kinds of groups. This was not my experience. And so I started really looking inward, and the payoff was great, because there's an interesting thing that when you are taking action that goes against your own self-worth, you're going to feel worse. But when you start taking action that builds esteem, you feel better about yourself. And for me, that started becoming the best drug that I could possibly use. All of a sudden, I started behaving in a way that I could actually feel pretty good about. And it was like, wow, why don't I just keep doing that thing over and over and over again? Trust me, I am far from a saint, but I really started getting a sense of like, well, but this is who I was supposed to be. It took a long time. And there was a lot of weird corners I had to go around in order to get to that place. But little by little, I started going, okay, this is really who it is that I am. And that's when my father was like, he became like the perfect parent. You know what I mean? Like if I just showed up and was like, oh, start reading this stuff when you were 11. And ironically, I was reading the Quran when I was 11 and 12 years old.
Wow.
I don't know why, because there was always a thing in me, I suppose, that wanted to know what you need to do to find happiness, salvation, correction, redemption, whatever you want to cast upon it. And so I think there was always a part of me, but I figured, well, my dad is heading this direction. This is where I should go.
Sure.
And when that thing changed, then I got to go explore these other avenues. And it was really like, I'm not telling anybody. Now I couldn't care less.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, well, it's kind of funny too, because going back to the cult idea, and you said it's like tongue in cheek, it sounds like a Tony Robbins place to live and play. Like that's really what Tony Robbins talks about, right? Self-worth and like what do you need to work on? And it's really like, it's kind of like self-development today, but how long ago was this happening?
Oh, this was 24 years ago when you were 4.
I wish I was 4. I'm older than that, but with that being said, like it wasn't as big as it is now. What made it cult-like? Was there some underlying thing? So here's why I'm asking. And it might not go anywhere, but I just watched a majority. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched the majority of they did this thing on Charles Manson last night on NBC. It was like a documentary, which is very intriguing. And like that was crazy. Like just watching how that kind of turned all of a sudden one day, went about peace and love and some hallucinogenics, and it flipped to, we're going to murder everybody. So like what was the deal with this group?
Well, this group was really much more about studying the tree of life and, praying to a multitude of different gods and god forms that represented a whole bunch of things, and the Hebrew tetragrammaton and learning Greek. And the main focus was will. And it's all wrapped in a word called thelema, which is a Greek word, means will, and it comes from, was made popularized by the person who was considered the most wicked person to ever live. But he wasn't. Aleister Crowley, who was just really, when you start reading his writings, he's a bit of a wordy knucklehead, but he really, if he was going to meditate, he was going to meditate for 5 hours on top of the biggest mountain that he could climb.
Yeah.
And he was a really interesting guy. I don't think I would like him as an individual, but he was really going after this connection with self. And he was willing to go certainly far beyond the things that I was willing to do, but I was certainly willing to meditate. And I was certainly willing to pray. And I was certainly willing to be conscious of the kinds of actions that I wanted to take and then take the action, if that makes sense.
For sure. No, totally. It totally makes sense. So earlier you had mentioned purpose a number of times, right?
Yep.
And your purpose and how important that is to your life. But the thing about purpose and what I've realized is that you never arrive at your purpose, right? So it's a journey that we're probably on until the day we die. So my question for you is, what's next? Like your book is officially out, which is amazing, but like what's next in this purpose journey?
Well, I mean, I think, what you said really kind of nailed it. I mean, what's my purpose? Okay, so I have a beautiful daughter who's now in school. My purpose is that when I see her, to make sure that she understands, even if I disagree with her, that my job is to be a soft landing for her. My job is to be a good son. My job is to be a really, really good husband. as somebody who has a lot of thoughts and feelings, and as a writer, I keep writing more books about relationships and how to overcome the challenging stuff and start learning from, my father was a very challenging personality. And I think I could probably go through the rest of my life hating him or being disappointed by him or not trusting men or one of a million things, right? Mm-hmm. So what that ultimately means is that I need to start focusing on doing the things that aren't necessarily kind of natural to me, as it were. So, I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep being a good dad, or at least I'm going to attempt to be. My kid right now doesn't make a ton of sense to me. That's all right. That's not her job. Her job is not to make sense to me. Her job's to go out and explore sort of the nature and power of her being and go kick butt wherever she can. And if she needs help, then I'll be there.
And if you think that you made sense to your mother and father, and you're not getting repaid right now, that's all part of it, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's all part of it. There's an interesting thing. I was just reading a book on the 10 Commandments, and it points out that when it does talk about love thy neighbor, but it doesn't say love thy parents. It says honor thy parents or honor thy mother and father. And so I think my daughter honors me in the way, however it is that she does, and I do honor my parents. My parents may not feel honored. You know what I mean?
Sure.
They may not feel honored. I mean, when my book, I did a reading last week in Echo Park, and my mother showed up, and it was traumatizing for me because I did not want her there, because when I finished the book, I had to sit her down and say, I love you, and I wrote a book about Dad. And she's like, oh, really? Sitting on the edge of her chair. And I said, nobody looks good. This is not a book of compliments. I look terrible in it. And you're in it too, Mom. And she said, well, is it funny? And I said, I think it's funny. I mean, I believe that it is funny, but I didn't, so it's a tricky thing. She's read it. And that was sort of like my one major misgiving, is that somebody's going to have feelings about what it is that I wrote. And, my character is terrible because I said these things and I should have been a better, more loving son. Who knows? I don't know what the answer is to these things. I do believe that at the end of the day, I'm proud of the work, which brings me contentment. Like I feel that I did, I think I walked a fine line with a certain amount of dignity, kind of showing the light and darkness and how those kinds of things interplay with each other. Because we're human. We're wildly fallible.
Yeah, for sure. Now, obviously, the coolest part about this podcast is I get to have conversations with extremely successful people, however you want to define success, right? So my question for you is, what is your definition of success? And what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Those are both sort of big questions. Actually, the second one isn't that big. So let me start with that one first. I try to read every single day. I try to sing every day. And I try to ask how somebody else is doing every day. And I do those 3 things pretty regularly and have for quite a while. And I think those are all really helpful. I do pray, and my conception of God changes like the wind. For a long time, sort of like my best conception of God was Miles Davis. I considered him to be a master of chaotic harmony, which is sort of like jazz, a thing that I like to call life, because life has a certain amount of chaotic harmony to it. And I thought he was wonderful. And when I told people this, especially religious people, they'd get all flipped out. And so that was just an added bonus. You know what I mean? Like
I love
this jazz trumpeter, who was on heroin. That's your God? How... You're evil. Yeah. And success is when I don't think I know too much, if I'm honest. Like if I don't have the answer, I'm usually okay. That usually means that I am curious enough to not take myself that seriously.
I love
You know
that.
what I mean? I think we live in a society with a lot of rules, and I think in many cases those rules are quite necessary, but not necessarily for me. Like some days this is the path I should be taking, and other days it's like, you know what? It's time to zag. Or it's time to zig. I need to be doing these little things to make sure that I don't get too complacent with what it is that I think I know or what it is that I think that I'm owed. That's a big one.
Yeah, totally.
If I think, certainly I think very early on in sort of like the separation between Dad and I think that I believe that the world owed me something. You owed me because of whatever nonsense I told myself.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, for sure. And I love first on this show, like because because it's just conversational, there's a lot of firsts. But when I ask that question to everybody, I love when there's a first. So you did 3 firsts on that. So 1, you were the first person to talk about the 3 steps before your definition of success. You're the first person to mention something in those 3 that I personally do, which is reaching out to somebody every single day. And then the third one was the idea of like, not being like the smartest person or not knowing everything. That was the first time that's ever been listed as like a definition of success. So and also the first time 3 things have ever happened for the first time in that question. So I love it. I love it. So obviously, as people listen to the show and you're sharing these amazing stories and people are getting a feel for how it is you tell your stories, how do they get a hold of your book? Where can they go to buy it? Because at this point, when this comes out, hopefully you're already a bestseller. Hopefully you're already reaching all your goals possible. But how do people add to that and how do people get a hold of this amazing book?
Well, thank you. You should be able to find it anywhere. I mean, obviously the likely suspects are, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. They're both online right now. Matter of fact, I did the Audible for it a few weeks ago. So that's now available on Amazon. And so you can get it in a variety of ways there. I also recommend places like IndieBound. .org because it certainly carries the book for one, and B, it will hook you up with local independent booksellers, which I think is a lovely thing. Certainly Powell's, and then you can certainly find more about it at devingallaudet.com.
Awesome. I love that. So we'll link up all that stuff in the show notes. That way people can just click and go to it. So I wrap up all these shows with 5 rapid fire questions. But before we get there, is there anything else that you want to add?
Let's see. Well, can I do one more book thing?
Of course.
I've traveled I've gotten over $400,000 worth of free travel. I have a little program that I was selling a couple years ago. And if you buy 3 of my books or buy my book and leave a review on Amazon, I will give you that program for free. And it's got like 20 ebooks. Actually, no, that's way too many. That was an over exaggeration. I have like 10 ebooks and 3 modules, and I tell you what to do. And here are the things that I said, and here's why it works. So if anybody wants that, I'm just throwing it out there. Is that terrible? Is that something you'll have to edit out later?
No, that's great because anybody likes to travel, especially if it's free. So yeah. I think that's a great offer, and we'll link all that stuff in the show notes too, for sure. I think that's amazing. And then we'll make sure they go there and then they take advantage of the free thing. So let's get in the 5 rapid fire questions. Some are fun, some are serious. I just ask you this. Answer within 1 word or at the most 1 sentence. Are you ready?
For 1 sentence, probably not, but fire away.
All right. The first one is, what is your favorite smell?
Butterscotch.
Nice. I'm glad you didn't say vanilla. Everybody says vanilla. I don't know
That's
why. Well, you don't. You say butterscotch. What is the number 1 trait that your friends must have?
Compassion.
I love that. If you could have any dinner with anybody living or dead, who would it be?
Mark Twain.
Nice. At the end of your life, if you could only be remembered for 1 sentence, what would that be?
Kindness.
Love it. Now, obviously, this podcast is called The Growth Now Movement, so I wrap up every single episode with this one question, and that is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Oh, man. 1 sentence?
You can go a little long on this one.
I think I was living in the back of my mother's house, and I had these shoes that had holes in them. I write about this in the book, so I'm not going to go into too many details, but there was a moment where I realized that the drugs and the alcohol and the cigarettes and the women was not the problem. And those were just symptoms. And that was probably the major was like, oh, I got it. In other words, the only common denominator in all of those things was me. And so that's where it was like, okay, I need to start looking inward. It still took a little bit of time.
Of course.
Because I thought, guns a-blazing.
Life is a journey, man. Devin, Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. And not only that, just writing your story and letting people know this journey that we call life. Even though in serious moments we can laugh at it and we can have a good time along the way, even in the worst of moments. Just thank you so much, man.
Oh, I'm beyond grateful. This was a really good interview. I hope, I actually have a feeling that, the people who are listening to you are really, inspired by your depth and what you're accomplishing. I think it's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, man. I really do appreciate that. We will definitely talk soon. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Growth Now movement. This is how you can really help me out. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. And let's grow this movement to epic heights. And it's all going to be because of you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.